After he leaked my pics, I destroyed his 14+ years of hard work, leaving him with nothing. My boyfriend and I had met online more than 6 years ago through an online game called RuneScape. He was 14 and I was 17, but it seemed like we had been together forever. We both played the game a lot and bonded over it, eventually leading us to begin a long-distance romance. Things started to get more serious as the years passed and we began visiting each other in person every few months. We were about 1,500 miles away, so one of our main goals for the future was moving in together and shortening the distance. My job had stopped us from doing that, but we had finally chosen a date for me to move in with him in December of this year. Our relationship never had any big problems, and I was more than glad to have him in my life as he was glad to have me. As I grew older, I began to play RuneScape less, as work occupied most of my time. He continued to play often, even more than when I first met him. He could never really keep a job and hardly had any money. But I backed him over the years and even paid his rent from far away after he left his parents' house a few years ago. I never really minded it because he was kind, but we started to have issues. In November of last year, I couldn't help pay his monthly rent. I was low on money after having to pay my own bills along with car fixes and dues I owed to the state, and I just couldn't afford to support him at the time. When I phoned him one night to talk about it, he freaked out and started crying that he didn't want to live with his parents again. I tried calming him down and even suggested that I could help him find a short-term job until I could start providing for him again, but he wasn't accepting it. He claimed his parents would mistreat him if he returned home, which I know isn't true because he and his parents have stayed with me several times. They've given him everything. I eventually did calm him down, but he remained moody the entire night and we eventually ended the call. Because I cared about him, I reached out to his dad the next day and informed him that he would probably be moving back home after his lease ended that month. I explained how I wouldn't be able to afford his living costs for a month or two and if there were any nearby jobs he could do to, earn some money. Apparently, a friend of his dad needed help managing a small warehouse for his business and was looking to potentially hire my boyfriend for the season. It paid $15 per hour and was super simple, lifting boxes, sweeping, and keeping track of inventory. I mentioned it to my boyfriend that same night and he was not happy. Not only did he not want to work in a basic warehouse, but he didn't want to work at all. All he planned to do day in, day out was play RuneScape. I mentioned a few other job offers I had found in his area and he immediately rejected all of them as well. He then had the nerve to comment about how he thinks I should work harder and maybe get a second job. I kept my cool and just argued against it until we eventually ended the call. I fell on my bed and cried for a good hour or two afterwards because of the intense emotional pressure I was under. Not only do I work 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, I'm also an industrial meteorologist. If I recall correctly, that's a lot more effort than playing RuneScape every day and using my Hulu account. I really thought about breaking up with him right then, but I changed my mind and decided to give him one more chance. Looking back on it, it was a big error. I messaged him throughout the night and we sort of made up, but I was still a little worried about the entire situation. He had moved back with his parents by the time December came and I began to help him search for jobs while he wasted his life away playing video games. I eventually convinced him to start working at a small retail store near his house and he thankfully began to earn some money. I would still buy him video games and send him money like usual because I pampered him, and our relationship began to feel somewhat okay again. Last month, both him and I pooled our money together to fly him across the US to stay with me for 4 days. We hadn't seen each other in person since last summer, so we were both excited about it. He arrived and we had a great time for the first few days because he could actually treat me to dates for once with his new earnings. Everything was perfect until I saw his phone's lock screen while he was in the shower. I could have ran into the bathroom and broken his neck at that instant, but I held myself together as best as I could without harming him. I had never felt so exploited, disrespected, or loathed in my entire life. When he emerged from the bathroom, I offered him a pretend smile, but I really detested him from that instant on. He could have collapsed dead on the ground and I would have spat on him. I spent the rest of the night watching him play RuneScape and I stayed very silent. He noticed this and asked me if everything was alright, and I fibbed and told him I was fine. When it was time to sleep, I allowed that jerk to get into bed with me and he tried to start being intimate because it was our last night together. I declined as nicely as I could without ripping his part completely off. He was sad, but fell asleep quickly. Right after he fell asleep, I reached over and disconnected his phone and began searching through his messages with that girl. I was afraid that I had misunderstood the message I had seen, but I was totally correct after all. Not only had he been unfaithful to me, he had been doing so for nearly 6 months, leading me to think that he connected with another girl right after I couldn't cover his living expenses in November. I scrolled through likely 100,000 messages and felt like throwing up everything inside me by the end of it. He had badmouthed me, claimed I was emotionally harsh, just as he had done with his parents, and even sent this girl my private photos so they could criticize my looks. When morning arrived, I had slept in due to how late I was up reading his messages. I woke up to find him on my computer playing RuneScape and eating my snacks. It was as if our entire relationship had been erased from my memory, and he was now a mean stranger sitting in my home. I wanted to yell at him, I wanted to rip him apart and toss him out of my home onto the road, but I didn't. In fact, I showed him as much kindness and attention as I could gather that morning because I wanted to leave things feeling normal between us. I took him to the airport and we had a quick and sad goodbye before I left him for good, unknown to him. I drove back home as calmly as I could before crying a lot in a mix of total anger and emotional hurt. I ended up kicking my bed frame so hard that the wood cracked and I had to get a new one recently. If only it were his spot. I wanted to shatter his heart by the time he got back home, but I wanted it to really sting. I logged into our shared RuneScape account that we had created several years ago, where he and I would work on training the same account and growing it almost like our child. We had always joked that if we were to ever break up, he would take half of the account's bank contents and I would take the rest. I took my part and transferred it to my main account before taking his part and giving it away to random players throughout the game. Every last bit of it. Even items I couldn't usually trade away, I used a spell to turn the items into coins which I then gave away too. The bank was now empty. It then hit me that I had the login info to his main account written down on my desk, as he would often have me train his farming skill. I didn't hesitate at all and logged into his valuable 14-year-old RuneScape account. I straight away took all of the contents of his bank and sold it all on the Grand Exchange, a marketplace in the game. It took a really long time to clear out his bank, but he would still be flying home for about another 4 hours, so I had plenty of time. By the time I had destroyed everything, I had 4 stacks of coins totaling over 8.5 billion. Now what to use it on? I wanted to blow his life savings on the most pointless, silly thing I could think of, other than him. I logged back into my main account to contact a friend of mine who collects big stacks of burnt food. For those who don't know, burnt food in RuneScape is useless. You can't fix them, eat them, or even sell them on the Grand Exchange. They are, however, tradable among players. I've always teased this guy for collecting burnt food, but I was now more grateful than ever to have met him in my revenge. I asked him what the most rare, undesired item of the burnt food kind was and he said burnt spider. Sure enough, he had about 6,000 of the item spider on stick, burned, in his bank that he was ready to sell me. Feeling generous with my ex-boyfriend's coins, I gave my friend a full stack of 2.147 billion coins and left a very happy customer. I placed the 6,083 burnt spiders in his bank, but still had about 6 billion coins left to use. With the remaining money, I decided to spoil myself. I went to the Grand Exchange and ended up having a huge shopping spree. The first thing I got were 100 bonds. If you're not familiar, a bond in RuneScape gives you 14 days of in-game membership. After moving all 100 bonds to my account, I now have almost 4 years of membership paid for me. I used most of his coins on really nice armor and weapons, all of which went straight into my account. He still had about an extra billion, so I used it on the materials I needed to level up a costly skill of mine. By the end of the day, he was left with a measly 150,000 coins in his bank, all of which I gave to a guy making pizzas outside of the exchange. Nothing remained, so I chose to pick up a stack of bones off the ground and leave it alone in his bank. It might seem small, but I laughed for quite some time. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is so mean. You destroyed the tens of thousands of hours he had spent in a game. Well, it was time he learned that I can be tough, a really tough person. On top of using up every single coin he had ever earned, I raised his defense skill. This may not seem bad, in fact. It seems like a helpful thing. I advanced his account, right? Well, no, sadly for my ex, he had what gamers often call a pure account, meaning he never, ever chose to raise his defense skill from level 1, in order to maintain the lowest defense stats but have strong offensive stats. Well, not anymore. Enjoy your permanent level 6 defense. Thinking through hundreds of possible ways of getting even in my head, I decided on destroying his house. It's quite an accomplishment in RuneScape to own a nice house, actually. He had one of the best I had ever seen in the game. To have built it, he must have used well over a few billion coins. Too bad I took it apart all in a few minutes, erasing it all into cyberspace. And there's no backup either. He's going to have to repurchase everything with his non-existent cash if he wants a new house. Bye-bye, home of the cheater. Looking through his friends list, I chose to pretend to be him and visit his friends who were online and confess that I had cheated on my girlfriend and was completely proud of it. If his friends hadn't deleted him by then, I removed them. Every single one. Finally, to add a perfect little topping to this revenge-filled dessert, I changed his username. You can change your username once a month on RuneScape, so I updated this to let everyone know that he is a dishonest cheater. I won't mention his username here, but I did the best I could to embarrass him within a 12-character limit. He should be able to get back his previous username in about 3 weeks, but if he waits too long, I'll grab it and attach it to a spare account of mine permanently. He sent me a very angry and harsh message later that night, followed by photos of him in tears. I sent him a truthful message officially ending the relationship, while also frightening him away by warning to take him to court over sharing my private photos and possibly sending a cease and desist if he were to reach out to me anytime soon. I don't plan on doing any of that, I just don't want to talk to him ever again. After he shared my pics, I utterly wrecked his 14+ years of hard work, leaving him with nothing but a disgraceful username. Added, wow, I really didn't think this would get as much attention as it did. To clarify, this post is about old school RuneScape rather than RuneScape 3. We met playing RS3 but quickly focused all our efforts into old school when it first came out. He even moved 90% of his RS3 value over to old school through bots and such, making this revenge even more satisfying. So while his old school account is only 6 years old, as is mine, his riches were the combined effort of the previous 8 years on RS3.